welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I'd walk you through some maintenance on this 9-gallon Betta bowl. I really try not to do too much maintenance on this particular fish tank because this Betta is extremely sensitive to any sorts of changes in his environment. He is a pineapple Betta, and from what I have seen and heard, they are notorious for being fin rippers. So whenever I do any sort of maintenance on his tank, he tends to rip his own tail. So this type of maintenance is something that I usually do every 4 to 6 weeks. Unfortunately, this tank also is being overrun by Gibba, floating bladderwort, which tangles the plants and is quite a pain in the butt. But as I said, this Betta is so sensitive, I don't want to rip the tank apart and risk stressing him out to the point that he will destroy his tail. So for now, I let it grow wild, clean it out every few weeks, and let it be. It doesn't actually hurt anything. It does entangle the plants, but it doesn't hurt the fish at all. So here I'm just removing some water and untangling as much of that Gibba as I can. At this point, I also remove some of the floating plants, which is the Salvinia cocolata. And here's a better view of that Gibba. Gets tangled in things like moss and floating plants. And although it doesn't hurt fish at all, it does tend to entrap plants and tangle them and kind of hinder their growth. As I lift the Fluval U1 filter out, you can see that the outflow is barely there. So for this particular maintenance, I am going to also service the filter. I am just removing the top of the filter to expose the filter media, including the filter sponge. This actually comes with the filter, but I modified it slightly. The little insert in the middle, I removed it and cut it so that I could also add some separate media. This is the Seachem Matrix. I'm just gonna go ahead and remove those and give them a good rinse in the same water that I drained out of the tank, just to keep that beneficial bacteria a little bit less disturbed. And if you pull off the bottom portion of the filter, this is where the motor and impeller are. And this is a pretty common thing with Fluval filters. It needs to be cleaned out often. I've found that if your filter stops working or is making some kind of noise, most of the time it's because this impeller is dirty. So you just remove it out of that section there and clean it off really well. You can use a sponge after you remove it, or just take a Q-tip and kind of dig around in there. Then once that's clean, just go ahead and reassemble. This is the same sponge that was in there originally. Just taking it like with everything else and giving it a good rinse, squeeze out in that tank water, and then replacing it. Typically, I do not replace any parts of the filter media unless for some reason that sponge is just so dirty that you cannot clean it out. You want to try to save most parts of your media just to keep your beneficial bacteria intact, especially if you're also doing a water change at the same time. If you do too much at one time, water change, gravel vac, changing out filter media in a tank this size, it can definitely throw you into a mini cycle and cause it to crash. So just something to keep in mind with smaller tanks. And here I'm just removing more of that gibba, untangling the plants. I'm doing a little bit of trimming, but all in all, just really removing that gibba to give the plants more room to grow and untangle. Once I've got most of that removed, or as much as I can stand to remove, I take out a little bit more water. I specifically siphoned under where the fluval UN filter was sitting because a lot of detritus can build up underneath the filters. I like to wipe off the back wall and then slide the fluval UN back on. Typically, if you kind of start at the top and roll it down, it will suction itself to the bowl, even with the curve of the glass. And because this filter, when it's clean and fully functioning, it has a pretty strong current, I like to take the flap that's on the outflow and push it over so it lessens the outflow. But in this particular tank, and especially with long fin bettas, you need to stifle that outflow a little bit more, and so I use moss to kind of disperse that. And then just continuing on with the maintenance, I use a Chem sponge to wipe down the walls, and then replace with remineralized RODI water. I use salty shrimp as a remineralizer. As I am refilling, I'm realizing there's still quite a bit of gibba in there, so same thing, just removing, untangling plants. The only two fertilizers that I use for this particular tank is Chem Flourish Trace and Chem Excel. And I add those typically once every 1 to 2 weeks, and definitely at water changes. Another thing I add when I do maintenance on this tank is a dried Indian almond leaf, which is great for bettas to increase tannins in the water. They also have natural antibiotic healing tendencies. So this is something that is great for this particular Betta, who will inevitably bite his tail after any kind of maintenance. So that does it for maintenance on this tank this time. Just a quick clean, detangle, a little bit of trim, and cleaning out the filter. And that's all it takes for about 4 to 6 weeks. Do a little bit of untangling in between and 10 to 15% water changes, and that's all this guy needs. This tank is well understocked. The filter is made for technically up to 15 gallons, and this seems to be a great fit for this guy. I hope this video helped to answer a few questions. I will be doing more videos on different tanks that I have, including this one in the future. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below, and I will leave you with a few shots of this tank, and at the end I will give you all the details and specs. Thanks again for watching.